Okay, welcome to your first flipped classroom lesson. It won't be very long, but hopefully you get something out of it. So you are in the class biology. Biology is the study of life, and so we are going to study first the characteristics of all living things. So what I want you guys to think about is what characteristics do all living things have? So in your journal, take just a minute or so and list at least 3 of the characteristics or features you would think all living things have in common. Look at the fetus picture, the cat, think about trees, grass, bugs, all living things. What are some of those things that we all have in common? List those in your notes section at this time. Got about 10 seconds of that minute left. Okay, so let's go over what the 8 characteristics that all living things have in common. First off, in order to be considered an organism, which would be a living thing, what would the definition of that organism be? Anything that has all of the characteristics of life. So the first characteristic of life that we're going to talk about is that all living things are made up of cells. Okay, so living things are made of cells. They're made up of cells, and organisms can either be one of 2 things. They can be unicellular, meaning one cell or a single-celled organism, or they can be multicellular, meaning they have many cells. Unicellular would be an example of like an amoeba. Multicellular is us. All right, number 2, all living things can reproduce. You have 2 types of reproduction: asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction means new organisms have the same or a single parent. For instance, in the example picture here, right here, this example picture is binary fission in an amoeba. That is a form of asexual reproduction. One parent splits in half and forms 2 new daughter cells. Whereas sexual reproduction is where 2 cells from different organisms unite to produce the first cell of a new organism. In other words, the sperm and egg unite and produce a new organism with combined DNA from the 2 parent cells. Sexual reproduction is the most common form. So number 3, all living things are based on a universal genetic code. Our universal genetic code is simply our DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid. So we all think that, a tree or a fish or a bird or a person have different kinds of DNA, when in fact we all have the same DNA, just the order in which the DNA is in each of us is different, and that's what makes all living organisms different. So it's based on that genetic code and the order in which the base pairs are paired up, also in the fact of how many pairs we have. For instance, in a person, you find 46 sets of chromosomes, whereas in some other organisms, they might have 206 sets. So that's what makes the difference. It's just the order in which, or the sequence of the base pairing of the universal code that makes us different. So number 4 is all living things grow and develop. So you start out, for instance, we start out as an embryo at 8 weeks and eventually a fetus and grow and develop into what is a newborn baby at 9 months. There's a picture of 2 professional basketball players. One was, I think, 5'3", the other 7'8". I don't remember his exact height. But it just shows you the difference between the growth and development in each individual organism is not always the same. So they grow and develop, and at some point will increase in size. Organisms do change or develop over the course of their lifetime. And when we're using the word change here, we aren't talking about adapting. We're talking about they just develop and grow as you grew from an infant to a toddler to a teenager and eventually into an adult. Your features change. 5, all living things must obtain and use energy. In other words, to obtain energy, consume food. Plants, to obtain energy, consume sunlight. So number 5, fifth characteristic of all living things is they obtain and use materials and energy. They need these just to stay alive, and they need a constant supply of energy and metabolism. Metabolism is what we'll get into next. Metabolism is the combination of all chemical reactions in the body that builds or breaks down materials as it carries out its life's functions. So when we break down food to use it for energy, or when we build ATP in order to build energy in our cells themselves. Number 6 is all living things respond to their environment, meaning they respond to external and sometimes internal stimulus. Okay? Organisms detect and respond to heat, temperature changes, so heat or cold, light, gravity, those sort of things. A stimulus is a signal to which an organism responds. So I gave you being cold, hot, too light, too dark, gravity. In plants, they have what's called tropisms, which is a response to a stimulus, and it affects the way in which a plant grows. For instance, if you have a tall tree and there's another tree under it, and you notice that as they grow, that small tree starts to grow out toward the side, it's because it's growing towards the light, and it's trying to get out from the shadow of the bigger tree. That's a response to a stimulus. When we shiver or sweat, that is a response to a temperature stimulus, whether it's external or internal. All right, number 7, all living things maintain a stable environment. Stable meaning balanced. And this process is called homeostasis. Okay, so homeostasis is the maintaining of a stable internal environment in our bodies, in our brains, in order to carry out all life's functions. It often involves an internal feedback mechanism, which you can see an example of right here. Okay. Another example that you might think of would be a thermostat in your house to control the temperature, whether it's hot or cold, turning the air or heat on. And finally, number 8, all living things can change over time. So we talked about changing and growth and growing and developing. And now we're talking about living things changing over time. So in this instant, I'm talking about adapting. Okay? So I want you to look at this picture of these cell phones right now. And starting with this cell phone right here, and going all the way through to what looks like a first generation iPhone here. Look at the differences between all of those. And then in 2 to 3 sentences, I want you to go ahead and in your notebook or in your notes, I want you to go ahead and explain how the cell phone has evolved based on the photograph below. Really look at the details and characteristics and see what you think. take about 2 minutes. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and move on to our levels of organization. So again, as we said, taken as a group, organisms change over time, but these changes are very small and minute at any one point in time. But over long periods of time, they can be very significant because organisms are adapting. As you can see here with the pictures of the horses. All right, organizations or levels of organization is what we're going to cover next. And we go from very simple to the most complex. So I want you to think about in the universe and in your body, what would be the simplest form of matter, and start from there with the levels of organization. So that we're going to start at the molecular level. And at the molecular level, the very smallest thing that you should be able to think of is an atom. Okay? And when you have atoms, a group of atoms together make up molecules. And those molecules then make up what we call organelles. For example, the mitochondria that are found inside our cells and all living things that produce energy have mitochondria. So a group of organelles then makes up what we would go to next, which is our cellular level, and makes up so a group of organelles makes up our cells, and a group of cells makes up a group of tissues. A group of tissues makes up an organ. An organ makes up a group of organs makes up an organ system, and a group of organ systems makes up an organism or the individual. Okay. Once you get to the cellular level and to organisms, now we're going to go into the ecological levels, which would be going into populations, communities, biospheres, ecosystems, things like that. So looking from the very bottom down, starting here, molecules, cells, groups of cells, which are tissues, organs, and organ systems, then going to the organism or the individual, a group of organisms of one type, so a single species that live in an area, is called a population. A group of populations, so one or more populations of different that live in a defined area, is a community. And the community with its non-living or abiotic factors and surroundings like air and water, those are abiotic, non-living. Biotic means living. And then of course into different biomes like the tundra, the savannas, the grasslands, marine, freshwater, and then into, I'm sorry, didn't mean to hit that, into the biosphere. Okay? Alright guys, that's going to be it for today. If you need to watch anything again, please do. If you have any questions, make sure to write them down. Make sure you've finished all your notes and answered your guiding question. And I will see you in class on Monday. Have a good weekend.